The Sunday Baroque podcast is made possible by WSHU and the Friends of Sunday Baroque. You can find out more about the Friends of Sunday Baroque and find out how to become one yourself by visiting our website, sundaybaroque.org, under the Contact tab.
Dr. Joyce Chen is a harpsichordist who performs actively in the greater Philadelphia and New York areas as a soloist and in various ensembles. The award-winning musician is currently pursuing a PhD in historical musicology at Princeton University. She also earned her Bachelor of Science degree in mechanical engineering from UC Berkeley and her Doctor of Musical Arts in harpsichord performance from Stony Brook University. Dr. Joyce Chen is speaking with me on Zoom about her life in music. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for the invite. And I'm so happy to be here.
So this past year plus has been super challenging for everyone, obviously, but there have been particular challenges for musicians. And could you just talk about how you're doing?
Today I'm doing okay. But I must say, I'm sure, just like other musicians, it's been pretty difficult, challenging. I'm not going to hide it. And it's been a roller coaster for me personally, because I would say, and please, hopefully no one hates me for saying that, but in the beginning, I was actually a little bit relieved, because I was actually preparing for my doctoral general's exam, which is like the biggest cornerstone you have right before you start writing your dissertation. And I was, obviously I live in Philadelphia, and I was commuting to Princeton on several times a week. And in addition to that, I had some performance projects. So in the beginning, I was like, oh my God, so I have a 2-month, not staycation and just study. So everyone else is baking bread and I was spending 12 hours a day studying. So at that point, it was actually really nice. Just the way it was set up. And I passed my exam. I did really well, but I think that was actually a godsend for me. I needed that break a little bit and just really focus on my work. But then after that, I started questioning, oh, wow, I guess I don't see performances coming back this next year. What am I doing? So I did spent a lot of time soul searching almost, just like, what do I want as a musician? What do I want as an academic? I have kind of a dual career. Mm-hmm. And on a side note, it was just to distract myself almost, I started painting a lot. So every single room in this house, so my partner and I bought a house and moved in right before a pandemic. Every single house and wall and surface you can see painted.
Wow.
So that's a silver lining, was like, wow, like just kind of went on with this whole home improvement project. And that was a very good distraction for me. And, it was very hard. I don't know, I'm sure it's the same for many musicians, just like, do you want to keep practicing when you know nothing's lining up, or do you now want to practice, but then we also were afraid, oh, if we don't do this, then people forget about us. So it's like kind of a two-way, kind of expectation, online presence, like people want to see you're still actively engaging with your art and craft. So people will, call you when the whole thing is over, or when things are loosened up a little bit. So that's kind of my journey, and I'm in just a much better place now. Like, I'm done with my coursework and I'm done with the exam. So all I have to focus on is really doing the research and playing when I can. So if that answers your question. So I'm kind of like, it was difficult. It was good and difficult. And now I'm kind of finding a balance in both, and kind of easing back to like the new normal. That's what everyone's saying it.
Right. Right. Well, that's great. I mean, and it's actually really impressive, because what you've just described is sort of this a pause. You sort of did this self-reflection and really thought about, what are my priorities? And I think it's something that all of us in the world, we don't necessarily have the luxury of doing that all the time. And this was enforced,
Right. And then, prioritizing, after the pandemic, when we're coming back, what is the most important thing for me? What are the
Right.
projects I really want to spend, do 120%? What are some things I may have to cut back, So
Right.
that was, that's kind of the silver lining of the pandemic. I don't know if that's a good way of putting it, but I'm trying to look
Sure.
at it in a more positive way. Just like, how can I restructure my life? What do I want as a, myself as a
Sure.
musician? Like, how can I keep, inspiring myself and others? I think that's the hardest thing to do, is like, how do you inspire other people as a musician when you're kind of struggling yourself?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. So, how did you get started in music? What instrument did you start on? How old were you? How'd that happen?
Yeah. So I was born and grew up in Taiwan, and I would say a lot of kids in Asia, that's a stereotypical thing. Was like, these
Oh,
kids get started at one of the musical instruments, or being active in musical activity, as that is good for your developing your brain and everything. So I actually started on the piano. Surprise, surprise. When I was 2. That's
wow.
so that didn't quite work out because I was just too small to even touch the keys. So
Oh,
I went to a few group class as a 2-year old with my mom,
wow.
and then that kind of, I was like, I couldn't really express myself, but they knew it was a mistake. So I actually started my formal training at 4. If that makes
Okay.
sense. And so I started piano lesson at 4, and then violin at 10, age 10. And at the time, I was really more into violin,
Huh.
but I never got as good as I wanted to be, because I started later than piano, for instance. So I was still using a lot of keyboard instinct on the
Mm-hmm.
violin, which doesn't quite work.
Mm-hmm.
And when I came to the States to go to college, I was actually an engineering student. I believe we might touch on that in a little bit. I was doing a music minor in college at Berkeley, and for one of the requirements is you have to perform in an ensemble, like whatever you want. I also did Japanese gamelan. That was quite
Wow.
a venture. Yeah, I know, it was super fun, super fun. And I was playing Bach on the piano, and I said, "Oh, I really want to be involved as a keyboard player." Because I was involved as a string player in orchestras and stuff. But then, so that's when I said, "Oh, there's a Baroque ensemble. I gotta check it out." And I
Oh,
went, and it was, at the time, it was directed by Davin Maroney, harpsichordist, musicologist,
wow.
and Carla Moore. She's still in the Bay Area. She's a violinist, and that's how I got started on the harpsichord. It was really just, I say it's really cliche, but love at first sight, first
Wow.
play, first sound. I don't know
Wow.
a good way of putting it. It was just really, I started playing it, and I was like, oh, I found my life purpose here. It was a
Wow.
very, very quick kind of realization. I was like, oh, this feels really right. I feel at home.
Wow. So, can I ask you, where did that come from? Like, you mentioned earlier that when you were really little, like the piano was too big. Do you have smaller hands? Is that part
Yes,
of it? Or, okay, is it the sound of
yes.
the instrument as well? I mean, what are the aspects of the harpsichord that made you fall? Like, what was tugging at you?
Yeah, so yeah, definitely you touch on that. So I'm petite, I'm 5'4", and I'm not huge. Although I do have pretty long fingers. I mean, on the piano I can do a tenth, which is
Mm.
pretty big for a
Okay.
female.
Mm-hmm.
But I at piano, I was actually pretty serious with the piano, and I was competing some
Mm-hmm.
regionally and then also nationally. And then at the point, I mean, I was not going to a conservatory, but then I just hit a plateau really in my technique. Like, I knew there were a lot of technical challenges. It was just really difficult. But then I hear all these sound in my head. Like, I know I'm very musical. I know I have the demand, but it was just like, oh my God, I feel almost there's some kind of disability. And then on the harpsichord, the first time, it was an Italian instrument built, Italian harpsichord built by John Phillips, still in Hertzel in California, I remember. And it was just, I actually played harpsichord for the first time at an audition. Like, I was,
Whoa.
I like I was really, you know, came to the audition and said, "Oh, I'm a pianist. I want to audition." They said, we play harpsichord here, right? For Baroque ensemble." I was like, "Yeah." "Can I audition on the piano?" "No." "You gotta try this." And so I was like, "Oh my God, why are the keys so much smaller? And then it's only 4 octaves. What am I gonna do?" And, and Davin Maroney was actually turning pages for me. This is still a great story. Like, he was just next to me. I was like, "I'm going to play Bach's Chromatic Fantasy and Fugue," which I actually play pretty well on the piano. But then I always felt like there's certain color I couldn't quite do. You just can't quite do the same way. And on the harpsichord, it was just like it clicked really quickly. Like, first, it was effortless for me. My fingers just run. I was like, "Oh, this is what I'm talking about." I couldn't do that so fast on the piano. And wow, like all these like kind of pseudo harpsichord technique that my teacher actually taught me about, like finger pedaling or how you're overholding. I try to imitate the harpsichord sound, but on the harpsichord, I don't have to imitate. I just do it. So it was about the touch, and then just the whole timbre just fits so much easier. And technically, it was effortless in terms of the runs. But then later on, when I actually studied harpsichord, I was like, wow, this is very different kinds of technique, and really changed the way I even think about music from that point forward.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah. I do want to take a slight detour and get back to the idea that you were a mechanical engineering major at first there, or you were a mechanical engineering major and got your degree in that, because I am very fascinated by the what seems to me like a number of people who are very successful in music who also were drawn to other fields, and often not at all music fields, like in your case, mechanical engineering. I know a number of physicians who, are very, very talented musicians and kind of came to a crossroads in life. Even actually, and this is really different, but the pianist Awadajan Pratt was a very, very competitive tennis player, and got to this point in his life as a teenager, or, when he was getting ready to choose his life's work and had to make a decision. So I'm really fascinated about that process. How did you navigate that time? How did you navigate making that decision?
Yes. It is I would say it was very, very challenging. And actually just a few years ago, I believe like 2015 and 16, I was about to apply for a PhD program in physics and go back to the field. Because I was like, I'm not sure I have a viable career outlook here. So I was actually chickening out and was like, I can do really well. I'm going to go back. But that didn't happen. But I would say, yes, in college. So as I mentioned, I was a major in engineering, but then minor in music. But in reality, it was more like minor in engineering and major in music. Like the amount of time I was spending in the two sides of the campus. Like, people see me in music building and thought I was a music major. Oh, yeah. And it was just really interesting. I was definitely very drawn to physics and math. Like, they're part of the brain with, I don't know, just math, numbers, and that kind of analytical approach. Kind of just connect the dots with music. I can't really just verbalize it. So I definitely am drawn to that intellectually. But at Berkeley, it was very competitive, as you can probably imagine. It was very competitive. It was very demanding. And it was at the point, it was really my senior year when I had to make a decision whether am I applying to a PhD program in engineering or physics or something, or am I doing something else? So at first, and this is why I said, so Berkeley turned me into a little hippie. It really did. And so I said, you know what? I have kind of, do it by the book, like follow the guidelines, be a good academic, like be a good student, be a good Asian daughter, like for so long. I want to do something different. So I actually gave myself 2 years to pursue this. So originally it was going to be a master's degree, and I can go crazy and do whatever I want. And I said, but then at the end of 2 years, I'm coming back. That was the original plan. And fortunately, it lasted 10 years. So here I am.
Wow.
So that was the challenge. Was like I knew music was going to be very difficult as a career choice and industry, but then when I made the switch, which was actually quite sudden, like I was literally putting together my PhD application for engineering 10 days before December 1st. I believe that was the deadline. And I had an epiphany one day and just said, screw that, I'm going to put an application for music instead. So that is literally what happened. I just went with it without thinking very much.
Wow.
And I deal with the consequence for the following 2 years and now 10 years.
Wow.
And I said, I'm still happy in the field. There are ups and downs, there are challenges, but like I really do feel like this is the right choice for me because I'm much happier, and I would say I will live without regret. Just this is what I really wanted to do. And I am actually able to incorporate some of my engineering background into my current research.
Oh.
So I'm happy, like where this is a good balance point right now.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that then, because since 2018, you've been working on a PhD in historical musicology at Princeton. Would you explain what historical musicology is and what your research entails and how you're using your science passion and aptitude for that?
Yeah, so I would just focus more on a broader sense. So musicology is really the study about music in so many different ways, and I would say our program it's gotten a lot more diverse. So you can do music cognition, you can do medieval music, you can do 17th century music, but then when we go into the program, we take 2 years of coursework with these different professors, and you learn from their specialty. So you have a very well-rounded lens into musicology, because we only have 24 hours a day, and your brain capacity is this much. There's impossible for someone to specialize in every field. So you take these very very contrasting topics, and then you finalize what you want to do. But when I come in, I already know I want to do 17th century music that has an acoustics aspect in this. So after I finished my coursework, and this past year I've been drafting my dissertation proposal, and now I've been writing it, is essentially I'm dealing with this idea. It's called experimentia and experimentum in Latin, but in English that means experience and experiments, and which is essentially how our listening may agree or not agree with the production of scientific knowledge. So what I learned in engineering, which is we learn all these Newtonian laws about how to describe natural phenomena, but then when you actually put that aside and then experience sound, which is maybe a very different kind of experience. There's no other way of putting it. A very different kind of account. But then how much of the scientific knowledge is dictating how we're experiencing something? Mm-hmm. And I believe if you point that forward, a lot of kind of aesthetic prejudice can actually trace back to who is writing the narrative, who is authorizing, who gets to say what is scientific knowledge, say about an acoustical wave or something like that. And then I'm coming into from a 17th century point of view, because that is where experimental philosophy really developed. And then that was when scientists really had awareness of how their experience is influencing what they think about nature, really. So they are like, okay, we're going to stick with numbers, we're going to stick with these formulas, but how we're hearing, we're seeing might be different. And so I'm kind of using that and looking at our 1950s and 60s hip kind of movement. It's very similar. There's kind of an antiquarian, backward-looking move, but then recreating new ideas and interpretation. This is like a lot, I know, in a few sentences, but that is kind of what my research is about at this point.
Wow. So can you come up with a sort of simple, layman-friendly example of what, even if it's just a hypothetical example?
Yeah. So for one, okay. So if we're thinking about a sound. So we're thinking about amplitude, a sound wave, how loud something is. So here's a very interesting, that's a trivia. So even though something is played at the same amplitude, the same energy level, but for different pitches, your perception is different. So what is actually in that? So if you're saying you're playing this at 10, amplitude 10, which is by physics term, it will be the same thing. But then because your pitch is different, so a higher pitch, even though you're playing at a softer sound, when we're perceiving that sound, that might sound louder than what it actually is compared to a different pitch. If that makes sense to you a little bit. So my dissertation kind of like evolves around these kind of disagreement between how we experience and what the science is telling us. That's the most simple term I can put it right now.
Oh, that's good. That's good. So, of course, this is the academic side of it, but we are talking about music. So I would love for you to talk about, who are your favorite composers and what's your favorite music, either to play or to listen to or both?
Oh, yeah. So a lot. I mean, a lot of it is, of course, Baroque composers, and Bach was kind of the person. Well, I know he's been dead, but I see him as responsible for pulling me into a different, career field. It was really Bach that, I was playing so much of Bach on the piano and then got interested on the harpsichord. And then for the past few years, I think I'm finding my voice as an early keyboard player. So I play a lot of Frescobaldi, William Byrd, and Storaccia, especially on the variation sets. So that's something I really like doing. And then I also work on some partimento. So how can I make variation sets and compose in that style? So that's something I really like doing is, how can I learn, kind of compose in that style? And then also not only for myself, but also to teach. If someone wants to improvise in the style of 17th century Italian idiom, I can say, well, these are some kind of patterns where you can look at this composer and learn how to do it. On a side note, though, like outside of early music, I really like jazz. I don't really know very much about jazz yet, but that's my new adventure. I don't have the jazz theory or jazz history there yet, but I've been playing some jazz with some students. But a few weeks ago, I played one of the in-person recital, which is a Claude Bolin's jazz suite for piano trio and flute.
Yeah, I know it well.
Yeah, it's really interesting because he actually kind of juxtaposed Baroque and blue together. So I thought that was like very interesting. It was like both. I love both. And then how is arranging this differently?
Yeah. Wow. Joyce, we're going to have to jam sometime.
Oh, yeah.
That's awesome. And, it's interesting because often early music, because there's so much of an improvisatory component, is often compared to jazz for that reason.
Yeah.
Like you have a structural harmonic framework, and then within that, you have the freedom to do some improvisation.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, like, what are you passionate about right now? What are some of the things that are, really important to you right now? Top of mind? What's exciting? What's urgent? What's the thing that's really got you excited these days?
You mean within music or anything?
Anything.
Oh, so one thing I didn't get to say very much, I promise I'll steer away from my dissertation. That's something I get to talk a lot about. But because of the pandemic, and this is one of the silver lining, is that I didn't have to be in person when I was teaching or doing research. So I thought, but here's the thing, I also couldn't travel to Europe and do any archival research. So I said I have to change my direction, and so I found Connecticut. So I was actually I actually made the arrangement of being an intern at Zuckerman Harpsichord in Stonington, Connecticut for 2 months. Wow. And right now I'm pretty close to a finish line of making my first harpsichord.
Wow.
So that is something I'm very excited about. And basically I've been that stage for a couple months now. I mean, I was doing some more, sanding and putting molding on, but like the case has been assembled a while ago. But the next stage, and this is what freaks me out the most, is painting. So I promise, I was like, I'm going to do this as much as I can on my own. And I'm an amateur painter, so you might be able to see some of my painting right there.
Yeah.
So I've been practicing painting in 17th century Flemish style. So once I put it on the soundboard, then I can put the rest of the harpsichord together. So that makes me tick at the, these couple months. And that is my deadline. This summer, I'm going to finish the harpsichord.
Wow.
So,
wow.
yeah.
And is this going to be an instrument that you will play, or are you going to sell it, or what? Okay.
I wouldn't sell it yet. But, well, maybe if someone wants to, but I'm going to paint the instrument pink. So I don't think that'll be very good for marketing.
Who knows?
You don't see a pink harpsichord anywhere. So I said, why not? It's my favorite color.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, that hopefully, I'll put it on social media and let people know. But yeah, that would be an instrument I'll be able to keep and, for gigging, very good. It's really small. It's one of those virginal, but then it's a very versatile instrument because it has like 5 octaves.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like this is one of those very popular kits that Zuckerman has, sold in the last decade.
Wow. Well, that's very impressive. And that really is a marriage of your scientific background and research orientation as well as your musical orientation.
Yes, for sure.
Fabulous. That's fabulous. I have been speaking with Dr. Joyce Chen, an award-winning harpsichordist who performs frequently as a soloist and in various ensembles in the U.S., across the country, and internationally. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.